Hello, everyone. This is Parrish Alford with the Daily Journal. I'm joined by Logan Lowery, our Mississippi State beat writer, and this is Double Coverage, a production of the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal. We're going to talk all things Mississippi State and Ole Miss for the next half hour or so. Logan is on location enjoying that upgrade at the Fairfield Inn. Logan, how are you, man?
I'm here. It's definitely been a busy last 2 weeks for me. I think I wrote a little bit about it in my column that I think it came out on Wednesday or maybe Thursday. I'm losing track of what day it is at this point, but I think on Monday I actually covered. I wrote 5 stories about 4 different sports. So and all 4 of those sports are going on at one time right now, and it's tough to keep track of them. I think I wrote in one of my stories before I went back and edited it. I had Mississippi State's men playing NC State in the Final Four in New York, and they're playing Penn State, and Mississippi State's women are playing NC State. And like I said, it's just been kind of one of those times where everything's kind of overlapping and stuff's starting to run together a little bit.
Well, it is the season of overlap, and I guess we should clarify that you are on location in Kansas City with the Mississippi State women. This is the 5-year anniversary, Logan, of Ole Miss's best Andy Kennedy team in Kansas City. So I covered that NCAA tournament there, and I know how nice that arena is, and that Power and Light district, they call it, right around it. So what have you seen there in your time so far?
I haven't seen just a whole lot. And in fact, that's kind of my plan. Whenever we wrap up this podcast, I'm gonna go out and do a little sightseeing. I took your advice and did the Jack Stack barbecue thing last night, and it was very good. And I had some burn-ins at the request of former Mississippi State quarterback Tyson Lee. He recommended for me to try that, and I did, and they were very good. And if State makes a little run here, I may go back. And I'm not a barbecue snob, by any means. I do enjoy barbecue, but to me, it's all about the sauce. If you've got a good sauce, you can pretty much make anything taste good. And they had a good sauce there, but it was good barbecue, and I enjoyed it.
It was a good restaurant. Now, a lot of different things there as well. The side dishes were good. They paid some attention to those. When I was there, Roy Williams had taken his North Carolina team there. Of course, he had previously, coached at Kansas and spent a lot of time there in the area. And he obviously knew Jack Stack, and they'd set aside a room, reserved a room for the Tar Heels. And so I was right outside the door watching these players go in and out there. It was a good place, fun place there. And I thought Kansas City had a very clean downtown and really a nice arena there in the Sprint Center. Talk to us, Logan, about the MSU women. What do you think happens here in the Sweet 16?
Anything could happen. I mean, I think Mississippi State surviving against Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State was a pretty big test for Mississippi State back on Monday at the Hump. That was a team that Mississippi State had only beat by 3 during the regular season back in December again in Starkville, and they came out. They were leading at the end of the first quarter. Oklahoma State was, and it was just I think it was a 1-point game at halftime. And Mississippi State, they tried to trade the lead a little bit back and forth early in the second half, in the third quarter, and Mississippi State kind of poured it on in the fourth quarter. I think they just kind of wore Oklahoma State down, and I think just that game kind of got the players' attention and got them kind of locked back into what it's going to take in the postseason. Because Oklahoma State, I believe, was a 9 seed, so they're definitely going to face some tougher competition than that as far as seeding goes. And they're playing an NC State team that's seeded 4th, and they're used to playing tough competition. They've played against Louisville twice. They've played against Notre Dame once this year. So those are some 2 of the other #1 seeds in this tournament. So they're going to face a tough test in NC State. And Vic Schaefer talked about how a mirror image. He thought that NC State reminded him a lot of his team. So it's going to be an interesting matchup, a team that is defensive first, and then that's kind of how Vic Schaefer coaches his team. So it's going to be a defensive battle when those two lock up tonight. And Mississippi State advances. They'll go on to the Elite Eight. And Victoria Vivian's talked about it. Last year, this is Mississippi State's third straight Sweet 16 appearance. But last year was the first time they've ever advanced beyond the Sweet 16 as a program. But that's just kind of expected right now for Mississippi State to advance and go on to the Final Four. I think a lot of Mississippi State fans have already made reservations in Columbus to go to the Final Four. But, last year was the first time this program's ever done that. And granted, they have a lot of the players returning back, but I think that's kind of the new standard that they've set. They've set the expectations very high, running through the regular season undefeated and, still sitting with that one loss. They're 34-1 right now. So, they've got a good team. They're as good as anybody. I think a lot of people are wanting to see that Mississippi State UConn matchup, and I know a lot of UConn fans want to get some revenge over what happened last year. But if that happens, that's going to happen in the national championship game. And there's still some good teams out there. And if the right formula rolls along, it's kind of how South Carolina beat Mississippi State this year. They got Tierra McCowan in foul trouble early. Mississippi State relies a lot on the three-point shot. That sometimes that doesn't happen. Just for whatever reason, your team has a bad shooting night. And that's what happens. They didn't have Tierra McCowan down low in the game to, to clean up a lot of those missed three-pointers. And next thing you know, South Carolina's jumped up on top of them. Mississippi State can't catch up. So, if that perfect storm rolls back around, Mississippi State could get beat at any of these rounds left.
Well, Logan, why are State fans making reservations in Columbus? It's only 20 minutes away. Why do they need reservations?
Yeah, I should just stay at my parents' house if it's just going to be in Columbus.
Yeah, Logan, I know in the first round against Nicholls State, the ladies won by 75 or 80 points eventually. But it was not a fast start. There were some turnovers at the beginning and then a competitive start at the beginning against Oklahoma State. Took State a while to gain some separation. Is there a disturbing trend there, or is that just part of the NCAA tournament?
I think the start during the Nicholls State game was just rust. I mean, they hadn't played in just about, I think it was 13 days in between games, and I think a little bit of rust started to show at the beginning of that. Now, it had been a week since Nicholls State had played, in 2 weeks essentially since Mississippi State had played, and I think that showed early on in that one. But the Oklahoma State game was just the fact that Oklahoma State was very good. I don't know how they got seated where they were, but I was very impressed with them when they played in December. I covered that game, and their point guard Lauren Goodwin's as good as anybody you'll find. She's a grad transfer, and she was incredible. And Mississippi State did a lot better job defensively against her. She had 35 points the first time they played, so they were able to hold her kind of about half of that, which is still a good night for most folks. But they prevented her from going off in that game, and I think that's what kind of led them to victory down the stretch. And plus, they got her into foul trouble. They got the whole team into foul trouble just about. So a lot of those players that finished that game were playing with 4 fouls. But the Nicholls State thing was probably due to rust. The Oklahoma State game was due to talent. So and I think Mississippi State's, that kind of got them locked in and kind of got them back engaged for what they need to do moving forward.
Folks, before we move on, I want to remind you about a couple of other podcasts to search for from the Daily Journal. Be sure to check out The Memo, our news podcast, all things Northeast Mississippi, diving deep there into local events with Chris Kiefer and Anna Crawford Kent. That comes to you every Thursday. And be sure to check out Prep Rally for all your high school sports needs. That's every Wednesday with Brad Locke and Dalton Middleton. Logan and I are here with you every Thursday or Friday, depending on schedules, with double coverage. Shifting gears, Logan, Ole Miss basketball, Kermit Davis was introduced as the new head coach on Monday. Of course, the news had been out there for quite some time. I learned after the fact that they actually had reached an agreement with Kermit Davis for about a week, but they couldn't announce him, could not officially announce him until some documents were signed, and he had to have a visit with human resources, and as public as these searches are, there are still things like that that have to take place. So that kind of delayed the school's official announcement there. But I really liked how Ole Miss handled that with the news already being out there. It wasn't like they tried to turn it into a big information type setting. It wasn't breaking news, but they chose to make it just more of an introduction and celebration. And they had a meet and greet with Kermit before he actually went to the podium with his family and made some remarks there. We'll talk about those remarks here in just a second. But they also had the band, cheerleaders, just a really nice setting there with most fans seated on the east side of the lower bowl of the pavilion there. So really nice atmosphere that day. There was a lot of negative response to some of Kermit's comments there. Logan, I don't know if you caught wind of that on Twitter or whatnot, or read some of that, but over the course of describing what an Ole Miss team under Kermit Davis would look like, he went on to talk about respect for the game, respect for one another, doing things the right way, and in the context of that conversation, he said this will be a team that respects the flag and the national anthem. Now, Logan, you would think that respecting the flag and the national anthem would not be a bad thing in America. And that was the only point during Kermit's remarks that he was interrupted by applause and had to pause a little bit before he continued. But, given the day and the age, there were some folks who jumped immediately to the conclusion that necessarily means that Ole Miss players would have their free speech limited, that freedom of expression would be limited. And number one, the administration has assured us that's not the case, that their individual rights and freedoms will be upheld. But I just didn't take it that way when he made those comments, and none of the other media covering did as well, because that just wasn't something that was addressed or questioned when we went back for the media question and answer period after his remarks. But there were several stories written, and Logan, anytime there's Ole Miss and anything about symbolism or race, those are hot button topics for Ole Miss, and there were a lot of there were several stories written on the national level critical of Kermit and those comments regarding his demand that his players stand and respect the flag. That's what it looks like. But here's what I think happened there, Logan. Again, we were talking about the context of doing things the right way and respect for the game. And I do know that Kermit's teams at Middle Tennessee, were very respectful of the flag and the national anthem, and there was a uniformity in the way that they approached the national anthem. Everyone stood, everyone, had hand over heart, stood, facing the flag. It was very uniform in how they approached that part of pregame ceremonies. And I think what, his message was that we're going to do things as a team and we're going to have respect for the game. So there was some blowback, from that part of his prepared comments. And I'm not sure that was prepared, Logan, because I think, he kind of got caught up in what he was talking about at the moment and may have veered off course into something that he was familiar with, because that was something that these Middle Tennessee guys did as a team. And I know that the university got a lot of compliments in how they handled that, the flag and the anthem becoming such a hot button topic. But anyway, if nothing else occurred from that point of the remarks, it drove home the fact for Kermit Davis that there are certain comments and things that you make as Ole Miss coach. If you do, they're going to be received in a certain way, and you're going to get mixed reviews. And anyway, so that little bit of controversy for the introduction of Kermit Davis. But all in all, I thought Ole Miss handled the introduction very well. I think people are pretty pleased with Kermit Davis's selection as coach. I still think there's a little bit of divide right now, because there were some who just wanted a big splashy hire, and that's not what Kermit is. But I tell you now, this is a guy who has been described to me several times over as a tactician, as a teacher, as a developer of talent. These are things that are very attractive. These are things Ole Miss needs at this point in time as it tries to revive the program. Lots of talk about the roster. How will he assemble a roster? And, it's going to include some transfers, probably more early right now in this transitional phase than it will later. But he was adamant that he wants to build a roster and give it that foundation with emphasis on high school players. And I think that Andy Kennedy had gotten away from that a little bit in his latter years as coach. He had some very good transfers come through in Marshall Henderson, Stephon Moody, but it's hard to find guys of that quality every time you need them, every 2 years. I go back and look at how that program was built as Kennedy became the winningest coach in Ole Miss history. And it was built with guys like Chris Warren, Zach Graham, Murphy Holloway, Tarico White, Reggie Buckner, 3-star high school kids that Kennedy found, scouted, and developed. And the best team that he had, I mentioned the Kansas City visit there for the NCAA tournament now 5 years ago. Ole Miss was a 12 seed after winning the SEC tournament and upset 5 seed Wisconsin. That team included Marshall Henderson, of course. He led the SEC in scoring that year. I want to say he was like 4 for 18 from the floor against Wisconsin, but he got hot late, hit a couple of shots in the comeback. Ole Miss took control of that game. Eventually, it was Marshall Henderson who was interviewed by Charles Barkley on the CBS NCAA tournament set there. And of course, that was a lot of that gained a lot of attention. It was Marshall Henderson, who was the subject of the tweet by LeBron James, who said that dude Henderson's got the greenest light I've ever seen, or something to that effect. But while Marshall Henderson was a big part of that team doesn't reach that level without Jarvis Summers, Murphy Holloway, Reggie Buckner, lots of other high school talent on that roster. And that'll be the focus of the Kermit Davis roster, will be the high school players. It will be interesting to see, how this first team, how this first roster comes together. Of course, there were several Ole Miss players in attendance at the introduction. We weren't able to speak to them in the last days under acting coach Tony Madlock. We heard different players talk about keeping options open about whether they will return or not. He'll have a good nucleus to begin with in the backcourt if Terrence Davis and Brian Tyree both return. The front court was a problem. He's going to need some help there. Bruce Stevens needs to continue to mature, but he'll be an impact as well. But, it could be a good core for Kermit Davis to begin his time with. And, of course, he's been out this week visiting with Ole Miss signees. Of course, the highest rated one, Sorrell Smith, a 3-star combo guard out of St. Petersburg, has asked for his release. I don't know that the paperwork has gone through on all that yet, that it's been officially granted. But Kermit mentioned him specifically, wanting to get into his home and visit with him and his mother. I know he's been out at the Junior College National Tournament as well. So Kermit Davis is on the move, trying to build that first roster, and we'll see. But Ole Miss began a new era in its basketball history with his introduction earlier this week. Shifting gears a little bit, Logan, let's talk some baseball. Mississippi State had lost 4 in a row. They win a couple this week over the Braves, over Alcorn State, and I believe they're on the road at Missouri. Is that right?
That's correct. They won one against Alford State. another against Texas Southern. So they played on back-to-back nights, played a couple of schools and got the offense going. So they're at Missouri this weekend. I'm actually, if everything works out all right, I'm going to actually go over to Columbia tomorrow on Saturday and actually cover that game. I've never covered baseball in Columbia. I've only covered a football game there. So I just thought it'd be a neat experience to go over there and see what the baseball digs are like. I would like to talk about Mississippi State's men's basketball team for just a minute. Just the fact that they're in the NIT Final Four. I know that's not the NCAA tournament, but Mississippi State's making some noise in the NIT Final Four. They'll play Penn State there, and Parrish, we could potentially get that matchup that I've been wanting. You wanted the Kermit Davis and Mississippi State matchup, but there's another matchup I was looking forward to, and that was Mississippi State versus Rick Stansbury. And that could actually happen in the NIT finals. If Western Kentucky wins and Mississippi State win, they would meet in the finals there at Madison Square Garden in New York. And I just think that would be a lot of fun. We're not going to go cover it. We're going to let the Associated Press do their thing up there. But just think that'd be a fun game. Now, Mississippi State ran Louisville out of their own gym the other night, won by 23 points at Louisville. And, of course, Mississippi State won at Baylor last Sunday. Quindary Weatherspoon had a last-second shot. So, Mississippi State's making some noise right now. They've got Nick Weatherspoon back from his hip injury. He's still not starting, but he's contributing. He had 12 points against Louisville the other night, and his brother Q had 19 points. So they're just getting contributions from a lot of different people right now, and they're just kind of clicking. And I think that's going to bode well for Mississippi State moving forward. They're returning everybody next year. They're losing one senior, and Drew Davis, who's a walk-on, I think he scored 3 points this season. So they're going to return everybody. They're bringing in 4 players in their recruiting class. The lowest rated one is rated 3 stars, and they've got a 5-star in Reggie Perry coming in, a 4-star in Robert Woodard out of Columbus. They get DJ Stewart, a guard. They've got a transfer that used to be at Arizona State. His name's Jethro. And I just think that's a cool name for somebody transferring into Mississippi State named Jethro. I forget what his last name is, but I think he's just one of those big, tall African guys, that's 6'10", 6'11", something like that. Just kind of a rim protector, shot blocker type. So I'm interested to see him play. He's been playing JUCO ball this year, so he'll come in and be eligible immediately next year. So big things happening for Ben Howland's team. And I think this is a step in the right direction.
That's good. Yeah, I'd forgotten about State there in the NIT. So much going on right now. Rick Stansbury, Logan, of course, we threw his name out there early in the coaching search for Ole Miss. I don't think there was ever any contact there, but he's done well at Western Kentucky. He'll be mentioned for other jobs as well. Do you know where Western finished in the Conference USA standings this year? They were running second much of the year behind Middle. Obviously, both of them lost in the conference tournament at some point, Marshall winning that event.
Yeah, I think that's where they finished up. It's the last that I looked is they were right in neck and neck right there with Middle, and I think Middle won that matchup if I'm not mistaken, and I think that's what gave Middle the edge in that thing. But I hadn't really paid just a whole lot of attention to that league, but I kind of keep up with it just to see how Stansbury's bunch is. And then when you and I were talking about Kermit so much over the last month or so, I've been kind of paying attention to that, but just kind of from afar.
Hey, we've got just a few minutes left here. Tell us about State in this baseball series, and then I'll wrap us up with Ole Miss.
All right. Yeah, Mississippi State right now, they needed that midweek series I mentioned. They scored a lot of runs against Alcorn. They scored a lot of runs against Texas Southern. And, that wasn't the case this past weekend in the SEC opening series against Vanderbilt. Mississippi State just could not get anything done offensively. They had no trouble getting runners on base. They would get singles and they get runners at first and second, load the bases up even at times. But they just could not come through with that clutch hit. I think they were like 2 of 30 something with runners on base for the weekend, and 0 for 11 in scoring position, or just something like crazy like that. I know in one of the games they finally scored. They were shut out in the opener. Finally scored on a solo home run in the bottom of the 9th inning in one of those games, and finally came through with a few runs on Sunday against Vanderbilt, but just couldn't get them to hold up. State's pitched it really well on the weekends. Maybe not so much during the midweek play, and last weekend they also committed 8 errors in the 3 games against Vanderbilt, so that's not helping them out any either. But yeah, hopefully they were able to clean some stuff up in that midweek series. Some of the SWAC schools kind of cure some of those blues sometimes when you play them, and you're able to get a little bit of confidence at the plate and score a lot of runs, and get a lot of strikeouts on the mound. And we'll have to see how that transitions as Mississippi State ventures back out on the road at Missouri. Missouri Missouri only won 1 of 3 when they went to LSU last weekend. They're not playing the best of ball, but they've got a pretty good record this year. I think they're 17-5, memory serves correct. And we'll have to see what they've got. They've got some pretty low ERAs on their team. So does Mississippi State. Connor Pilkington, Parrish, has 37 strikeouts and 2 walks on the year. That's a pretty good strikeout to walk ratio. But he's got a 1-2 record. He's only won 1 game all year, even with that crazy strikeout to walk ratio. He's just not getting any run support. I mean, he's an incredible pitcher, probably one of the best pitchers in the SEC that you'll see, and he'll be a 1st or 2nd round draft pick, come June. But right now he's just not getting any run support.
Well, they're not going to evaluate him in that draft based on wins and losses in college and run support. So that's the good news for Connor Pilkington. Ole Miss, big win last night in the series opener against Texas A&M, number 5 right now. The Rebels are in the D1Baseball.com top 25. Texas A&M is number 12. Ole Miss scored 3 times in the 8th inning to come from behind and win that game. And Logan, we might be seeing a changing of the guard at closer here for Ole Miss. It was not Dallas Woolfolk who came in to slam the door on Texas A&M. It was 3rd-year sophomore Parker Caracci, who has looked good in his work up to this point, and shows really good velocity and control. And that was the velocity is a little bit down for Woolfolk right now. He's trying to work himself back into the range that he showed last year. But it was Caracci in the late innings last night, pitched the last 2 innings, gave up 2 hits and kind of worked himself into a bases loaded 1-out situation in the bottom of the 8th after the Rebels had scored 3 times in the top of the 8th to go ahead 5-4. So the Aggies had that situation going. Looks like they might be able to tie the game, and Caracci strikes out the number 3 and number 4 hitters in the lineup. Then he comes up and sets the Aggies down in the 9th as well. 5 strikeouts out of 9 batters faced for Parker Caracci last night. Big win for Ole Miss. Not a bad offensive night, Logan. I look at this team and I think it's much better offensively than it was last year. Right now, the Rebels hitting about 50 points ahead of the 253 in which they finished the 2017 season. So I think they're improved, still not a dynamic offensive team. They put up 2 runs in the first 7 innings against the A&M starter. I still say they've got to do a better job of hitting good pitching earlier in games. But when Stephen Kolchak got out of the game, Ole Miss was able to rally against the bullpen. Big win. We'll see if they can win the series tonight or tomorrow in College Station. Tonight's game starts at 6, and that will be on the SEC network. Folks, that's it for this edition of Double Coverage. We thank you for clicking in with us today. Be sure to check out the memo, our news podcast, Diving Deep into Northeast Mississippi with Chris Kiefer and Anna Crawford Kent. That comes to you every Thursday. And also look for Prep Rally for all your high school sports needs. That's every Wednesday with Dalton Middleton and Brad Locke. Logan and I will be back with you next week for another round of Double Coverage.